All right. Good evening. My name is Dr. P. Dominique Paterano. I'm the president and founder of Crimson Coaching. And today's talk is called Self-Care and Taming Anxiety. This talk was intended for teens, but really anybody can apply lots of the principles in it. So I would be happy if students from 5 to 105 listened and got something out of it. So, just a little bit about myself before we start. I'm a former high school teacher who left the classroom full time to start Crimson Coaching in 2014. Crimson Coaching provides academic tutoring, test prep, and college counseling to students around the world via Zoom. And a lot of times people say, well, why did you name your company Crimson Coaching after a color? Well, that color, crimson, that deep red, is the color of associated with Harvard, where I got my undergraduate diploma, which you could see right behind me, and that's my class photo. And what I do is I coach students to achieve their full potential, whether that's on the SAT or AP US history or in writing their college essay. And I developed tonight's talk because a lot of times students' anxiety can really prevent them from achieving their highest goals. Just the other day, for instance, just yesterday, I was speaking to one of my students who took the May SAT, and he mentioned that, like many of you who may have taken the May SAT, he found the no calculator section 3 really difficult, and he started to get anxious. Being able to get a hold of that anxiety and nip it in the bud, or even prevent it, would really prevent him and other students like him to just achieve their goals. And so, I really feel for them because I'm also a former student who did struggle with anxiety, and through yoga and meditation, which I'll mention later on in the talk, I've really been able to overcome that and help other students really apply that to their test taking and just their everyday lives. So this talk, I just want to reiterate, and I'll mention that at the end of the talk as well, is really just the tip of the iceberg. There are lots of things that you can do to maintain your mental health as well as academic excellence. It doesn't have to be a trade-off. I think a lot of times people say, well, if I want to be the best, I need to rev myself up and be, this anxious type A person. That's one way to do it. It's also a way to, in my opinion, to get burnt out really quickly. So I do think you can lead a balanced lifestyle, but you might need to have some mindfulness and intention in order to do that. So tonight's agenda, I'll be speaking for about 30 to 40 minutes. This is a pre-recorded talk, so obviously we won't be having any questions and answer at the end, but I will be sharing my email with you. So if you have any questions while you're watching this at home, do feel free to just shoot me a quick email with any questions that might arise during the talk. Before we go any further, I would just like to thank you, the viewer, for watching, to the Ossining Public Library for sponsoring tonight's talk, and to Louis Krishy, the young adult librarian, for inviting me to speak tonight. So the doctor in Dr. P comes from a doctorate in history. And as a historian, I really like to share my sources and be really transparent about my sources. So as I mentioned, some of them are personal. I was the valedictorian of a very large public high school, and that worked really well to get me to Harvard as an undergraduate, but it took a toll. And I often felt really stressed out, both in high school and while I was a student at Harvard. And so I know firsthand a lot of the things that I'll be talking about tonight. But professionally, I've also seen anxiety in students from my very first school that I taught at when I was 26 at Great Neck North High School on Long Island. to Scarsdale. I finished up my career at Scarsdale High School in Westchester. And in between, I taught for 5 years at Horace Mann School, which is, one of the most competitive independent day schools in New York City. So a lot of students, particularly when I was at Horace Mann, I brought things like mindful breathing into the classroom, and that really began to help a lot of students when I was there. So in tonight's talk, we'll be doing some of the very same exercises that I gave my students at Horace Mann and Scarsdale. Leaving the classroom full-time in 2014, I started Crimson Coaching, where I've helped kids write essays that have gotten them into schools like Stanford, Princeton and Stanford, also SAT coaching that got them into places like Stanford. So, I see this firsthand one-on-one with my students, even now as a private tutor and coach. And finally, I like to stay abreast of the latest research in neuroscience, believe it or not, because what we all use to do things like the SAT and write essays is our brain. And one of my sources is not just one, there are others I'll mention in tonight's talk, is Andrew Huberman, who has a really popular podcast called the Huberman Lab. And I am a devotee. I listen every Monday when his new episodes drop, and I highly recommend it if you are interested in, as well, in the brain in general. But in particular, he does have a couple of episodes on controlling anxiety. And so those are one, if you don't have a lot of time, his episodes are very long. I would just recommend that one in particular. So let's talk a little bit about what anxiety looks like generally and in teens in particular. So sometimes students are anxious. These are like the not everybody who bobs their leg back and forth or fidgets is anxious, but many times they are. Sometimes they're irritable. A lot of times anxious people can be easily fatigued and sometimes will actually sleep more. It may present a little bit like depression, but that's because they're actually very anxious. Anxious people can have difficulty concentrating and or sleeping. And so sort of the first 3 slides that we're going to talk about and how to prevent anxiety is all leading up to getting good sleep. This is a real big one for parents. It's really important to know. So, sometimes I hear from parents, oh, my kid is lazy or they're really procrastinating. It's not because they're lazy. They might be procrastinating, but it's generally not because they're lazy, but because they are avoiding the task because for some reason they're very anxious about doing that task. And we'll talk about why in a second. In some cases, students can almost go into full-blown panic attacks. One time when I was tutoring a young lady from Horace Mann School for SAT, she really, had, blurry vision. Her palms started to get sweaty. She started to really have a rapid heart rate. That's a really extreme case. So any of these things would suggest that maybe a teen is anxious. Now, why they're anxious and display those symptoms, a lot of times, especially procrastination, comes from perfectionism, right? I'm not going to start something if I think I can't do it really well and or perfect, right? Although I didn't suffer from procrastination, I certainly suffered from perfectionism. And I realized that that is a huge source of anxiety because obviously no one is perfect, right? Social anxiety is another type of anxiety, right? So it's surrounding social interactions. I might feel very awkward or not able to talk to my peers. College admissions, of course, is another reason why many students get anxious. And of course, all three of these things are exacerbated by social media and the large amount of time that teens are spending on social media. Not just teens, all of us, but I would say especially teens, because unfortunately, their brains are still developing and they don't often have the fully developed prefrontal cortex, which can say, I need to stop looking at this and pull away because I'm getting anxious or depressed while I'm looking at TikTok, for example. Fear of the unknown. I think this is an under thought about cause for teens anxiety. You know, a lot of times Generation Z, the current generation of teens, their generation gets really maligned as not caring about anything. I think it's just the opposite. I think this generation of teens cares profoundly about the world, about social injustice, about climate change, when we were in COVID, about COVID, and all of these things. It's sort of unknown how they will play out, and that is incredibly destabilizing for adults, let alone for a teen. During COVID, I'm happy to say most activities are back. But during COVID, release valves like sports were taken away. And that also exacerbated students' anxiety. And although they're back, it may not completely erase the anxiety that sort of built up in students over that time period. And students are really worried about these questions. How can I be perfect, get into college, and measure up, all while I was isolated? Again, just because the pandemic ended doesn't mean that that general feeling of unease went away. So, the way that I like to think about addressing teens' anxiety as a way to, if not erase it, I mean, I think we all have some anxiety, we all have some stress, but as a way to mitigate it, comes from actually the neuropsychiatrist Daniel J. Siegel, who's at UCLA. He's come up with a concept called the healthy mind platter. And just like, a healthy plate will have mostly, veggies, some carbs, and some lean protein. A healthy mind needs to have sleep time, physical time, focus time, connecting time, playtime, downtime, and time in. And we'll talk about what time is at the end. Now, Dr. Dan recommends doing all 7 of these things every single day. I personally think doing something like time in is difficult for me to do every day. I would say and playtime is sometimes difficult for me to get into, but I like to do at least say 5 of the 7 things every day and get enough of them. So let's start with physical activity. If you are a student who's not in sports, you're going to try to exercise before 3 p.m. for your best sleep. So again, these first few slides are all leading up to getting enough sleep. Okay, I get that if you're a varsity athlete or even a JV athlete, it's very unlikely that you will be exercising that early in the day, but maybe on weekends you can try that. Okay, it's just you want to avoid very strenuous activity late in the day because that may rev up your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight response, and keep you awake. You don't have to do all 7 of those things distinctly. So, for example, you can overlap your physical time with your downtime or your social time. So, for example, if you walk, or I walk a lot, you might want to chat on the phone. If you like basketball, you can have fun and social time and physical activity while playing a basketball game with friends. All of these activities have additional anxiety reducing benefits when done in nature. So I get that in our neck of the woods, we can't always be outside. But for example, these days, I try to go outside with the very laptop that I'm recording this on as much as possible. And if I just have emails to do, I'll do them outside. If you can do your physical activity outside, even better. So one thing that Dr. Dan's platter, it's funny that it's a platter, it doesn't mention food. But I put this in there. Dr. P's mentioning food. It could be because I'm Italian and food's very important to me. But don't forget, there are some foods that can help tame anxiety. So anything that's antioxidant rich, as well as magnesium rich. I actually recently started taking a magnesium supplement at night to help promote my sleep. Not that I'm particularly anxious, but I do have problems staying asleep, like many old people my age. So you might want to talk to your doctor about whether that's appropriate for you too. Anything rich in zinc helps tame anxiety, as do omega-3 foods like salmon. You will start to realize that other than perhaps beef and eggs, egg yolks, many of these things are also heart healthy. Probiotic foods, there's now mounting evidence showing that there's a gut-brain access or connection, and building up the microbiome in your gut will help your brain function better and with less anxiety. And of course, you want to limit your caffeine. I will be completely honest and say this is something that I'm not great at. I do try to limit it to a certain time, 2 p.m. if I'm good. Sometimes it's later than that, but I know that I might pay the price later on by having trouble falling asleep. And then try to think about having some complex carbohydrates at night. That will, for people cutting calories, they'll always say, oh, no carbs past 6 p.m. But carbs are actually the thing that actually help you stay satiated and or give you a sense of sort of calmness. And so if you want to stay alert during the day, don't have your carbs during the day. Try to be relatively carb-free during the day and then have your carbs at night. This is a tip from Dr. Huberman. So most teens that I know, that everybody who works with teens that I know is saying that teens are not getting enough sleep. The average teen needs 9.25 hours of sleep a night, which means that some need even more. Some need 10 hours, but most teens that I know are not even getting 8 hours of sleep. So I would say let that be your bare minimum. So if you need to wake up at 6 a.m. for school, the latest you should be getting to bed is 10 p.m. And if you can't fall asleep right away, then think about at least getting into bed at 10 p.m. And if you have to do something, for example, like reading Moby Dick or something for English, then maybe you want to read before bed in order to do that. I'm losing my mouse. Hang on one second. Also, to promote sleep, keep your bedroom cool and dark. Don't have a TV in there. Don't keep your phone in there. Even if your phone adjusts for night, so if you have sort of like a warmer light on your laptop or on your phone, the light itself will still keep you awake. Not to mention the dopamine and the serotonin running through your head of the mainly dopamine of trying to get likes on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever. Okay. Weighted blankets have helped some people to feel more secure when they sleep. And you may also want to think about stopping all your screens 1 hour before sleep and instead kind of winding down, listen to music, take a hot bath. This is something else that I'm not great at, because oftentimes I do have to work at night and I'm not such a great night person, but try to keep naps under 30 minutes and before 3 p.m. so that you are able to fall asleep at night. This is another thing, a really interesting thing that I learned from Dr. Huberman, that in our evolution as humans, the only light we had really was the light of the sun, right? And we learned to wake up. Every cell in our body has a clock in it, and every cell in our body learned to sort of be more alert when the sun was at a low angle in the sky, when it started raising. And then it learned to shut down again when the sun was again at a low angle in the sky right before sunset. And so if you want to cue your body to start shutting down, think about avoiding all overhead lights after 9 p.m. So for example, I'll only have lamps on a desk, not lights that are over here. And when it gets even later, around actually, I usually will start doing that at around 7 p.m. When it's even later at 9 or 10 p.m., I'll only have candles and little tiny white Christmas lights on my floor. And that seems to be helpful for me. So focus time is physical time, fun time. That's usually pretty easy for students on the healthy mind platter. Focus time is often the most difficult piece of that platter, though. And so focus is really about sort of work, whatever you want to focus on. If you feel that time management is actually your sticking point, you may want to check out my free ebook on goal setting at crimsoncoaching.com. And it's a little workbook. It's really short. It's just about 18 pages, and you can print it out, and there's exercises for you in there. What I recommend is kind of thinking about, well, what are my goals? And if I want to reach those goals, I need to spend some time focusing in order to achieve them, right? Helping to make that explicit for some people will be enough. But again, a lot of this is connected with your sleep. So if you are not awake when you're waking up, if you don't feel alert, it's going to be very difficult for you to focus. So even on the weekends, try to think about waking up at the same time every day, at least within an hour. So if you wake up at 6, try to just wake up at 7 and avoid that sleep binging that often happens on weekends, because it's just going to make it that much difficult on Monday morning to get back into the routine. On the weekends, if you're doing work, I recommend making a schedule. I need to spend, X amount of minutes on chemistry, X amount of hours reading my AP US history, whatever it is, and give yourself breaks in between in order to get that done. I like to use the 5-to-1 rule, which means for every 5 minutes I work, I get 1 minute of rest or play. Now, that doesn't mean 5-1, 5-1. It probably, if you're in middle school, it'd be great to get work up to 25 minutes of work or focus and 5 minutes of play. If you're in high school, especially by 11th, 12th grade, you want to be at 50 minutes and then 10 minutes, okay? Dr. Huberman recommends the ultradian cycle, and he argues that, most of us can only work for 90 minutes at a time, and then we need to take a step back and have a real rest period. 90 minutes is, I think, a very long time for most high schoolers, but if you feel like you can work for 90 minutes at a time, go for it, but you might need to take little breaks in between as well. I try to encourage I try to encourage students to not have distractions during this time, during their focus time. So when you are focused on a task, you want to single task, meaning not multitask. You don't want to be checking your Instagram, then going to chemistry, checking your text, then going to algebra 2, whatever it is, okay? Even music does distract your brain. If you need to focus, you might want to get a nice set of noise canceling headphones. And if you feel like you really need some noise or something to block it out, try white noise, brown noise, binaural beats on YouTube, that sort of thing in the background. Okay, that should help you to get some focus in. If you're focusing, it's hopefully going to mean that you're going to get your work done more efficiently so that you do have more time to connect, play, and relax. So if you're a parent watching this, it's important to acknowledge that your teen is in a developmental stage where their friends, their peer group, are their world. And it is only normal and it's encouraged for their development to eventually leave the nest and maybe start their own family or be able to be an adult, functioning adult in the world, to break away from you. And so it's important for parents to acknowledge that the connecting time should not always be with the family. It should be with their peer group as well. I do recommend, if you are using playtime or connecting time or whatever as part of your breaks from focus time, using that 5-1 rule, like say you've worked for 30 minutes and you're saying, okay, I'm going to get a 6-minute break to go online. Make sure you're setting a timer for the end of that playtime as well, for the end of that break. Just like you're setting a timer for the end of work, because it's way too easy to fall down that rabbit hole of, 2 hours later, and now I just spent the last 2 hours on Fortnite, if you don't nip that in the bud, okay? Lastly, time in. I think that there's nobody better to define what time in is than Dr. Siegel himself. So this next quote comes directly from his website. He defines time in as when we reflect quietly, internally, focusing on sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. We help to better integrate the brain, meaning we integrate what has happened in our lives into who we are. People do this in different ways. Some people, including myself, meditate. Some people, including myself, journal. They pray. They consciously breathe. They have artistic or musical creations. All of these things are wonderful for sort of centering you and so if connecting time is turning your gaze outwards, which we all need to do to connect with other human beings, time in is turning that gaze inwards and really focusing on your own feelings and thoughts. So now's the time in the workshop where we're going to try a couple of these now. I do have on the resources page of crimsoncoaching.com, my website, a guided visualization that specifically addresses test anxiety. And if you're somebody who struggles with that, please feel free to check that out and play it as often as you need to. But we're going to do two things today. The first is going to be it's called a progressive muscle relaxation. So I am going to invite you to sit up nice and tall in your chair, have your feet flat on the ground, and keep your palms on your lap. And if you're in a chair with a back, try not to slump down into that chair. Try to have your butt on the edge of the chair and your back off the back of the chair so that you're sitting up nice and tall. Okay. And what we're going to do is progressively go from the tips of our toes all the way up to the top of our head, tensing and relaxing your muscles. I'm going to invite you, if you'd like to close your eyes, I'm going to do that. And that often helps when we close our eyes. It helps us to turn our gaze, our mental gaze inward. So the first thing we're going to do is scrunch up your toes, scrunch, 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 release. Point your toes up towards the sky, point, 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 and release. Now lift your heels up off the ground so you're tensing your calves. Hold, hold, hold. Release. Tense your thighs. Hold and tense. Release. Squeeze your buttocks. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. Release. Engage your abs, kind of suck them in towards your spine, and release. Draw your shoulder blades back towards one another. Squeeze, 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 and release. Make two fists and point them down towards the ground, and release. Now take your fists and make a muscle and release. Now shrug your shoulders up towards your ears. Shrug, 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 shrug. And release. Now squeeze your face like you just ate a lemon. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. And release. Now try everything all at the same time. Hold, 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 hold. Tense, 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 tense. And release. Good. Keep your eyes closed. Just take stock of your body. See if you feel any more relaxed than you did before we started. We're going to go right now into a breathing exercise. You're going to breathe in for a count of 4, hold for a count of 2, exhale for a count of 4, and hold for a count of 2. So ready, let's inhale here. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2. Inhale through your nose, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2. Exhale through your nose, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2. Inhale through your nose, letting your belly hang open. 3, 4. Hold, 2. Exhale through your nose, drawing your belly in towards your spine. 3, 4. Hold, 2. Do this 3 more times at your own pace. When you're ready, gently open up your eyes if your eyes were closed. And usually at this point, if I'm giving this talk live, I talk to people about how they feel, and almost always they feel more relaxed than when they first started. And so these 2 exercises are really great to do, especially for teens right before bed. While you're lying in bed, many teens struggle with being able to fall asleep. Unlike old people like me, we fall asleep quickly, but then we can't get back to sleep. You guys, teens, usually fall asleep quickly, rather have trouble falling asleep, but once you're asleep, you stay asleep. So while you're in bed, potentially tossing and turning, think about lying on your back and doing the progressive muscle relaxation first, and then the breathing exercise. If you can extend the exhale to 6, 8, 10, however long you can, that's going to increase the parasympathetic response, meaning the response of your autonomic nervous system that calms you down. And so a longer exhale will help fight anxiety. Once you get good at that while you're lying in bed at night, you can take that into the SAT with you right before you start a test in school. Anytime you feel anxious, nobody else needs to know that you're doing it. If you feel kind of funny, you could always go into the ladies' or men's room and do it. But I do think that you could easily do it, something like especially the progressive muscle relaxation and the breathing. You don't need to close your eyes to get the same relaxing effect. You could always do this in school anytime that you are anxious, and hopefully it will help before you start to spiral. That's really the key. You want to get hold of your anxiety. It's not that you're never going to have anxiety, you will, but you want to get a hold of it before you start spiraling out of control. So I want to be very clear that these techniques that I'm giving may not be enough for everyone, especially if you suffer from clinical anxiety, right? You may need more mental health resources. The Harvard Health Newsletter is a great resource for health in general. I have a link on my website on the stress reduction tab at crimsoncoaching.com to a link to a full article there on stress in teens. There are many studies that show if you, for example, with social anxiety, if you approach the thing that is making you anxious rather than avoiding it, eventually it will get easier, right? So for example, I have a niece who she's not a teen. She was about 10 when this occurred. I was taking her for ice cream, and she really doesn't like interacting with adults that she doesn't know. But I told her, if you want the ice cream, you got to order from Baskin and Robbins, man, yourself. I'm not going to order for you, because she wanted me to say what she wanted. But she did, she wanted that ice cream, that mint chocolate chip cone. So having little exposures like that will help you. But practice them again through baby steps, right? You're probably not going, if you don't like public speaking, you may not want to sign up to be the lector at your church. You may want to just try, doing something very small and building up to that. Believe it or not, cold water exposure has actually been shown to not only increase our tolerance for cold, but it also increases our tolerance for other things we don't like. And I myself, as an open water swimmer, have experienced this for certain. And I really dislike the cold, and so I will purposely swim in cold water, and it has definitely made me more tolerant of doing other things that I don't like to do. There are, therapists. I am not one of them, but there are therapists. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown to help with anxiety. There's also people who do tapping. I don't know that myself, but you could go on YouTube and look that out. And then, some people really do need medication, right? If your anxiety is really bad, I don't want to suggest that, just eating magnesium rich foods is going to help you. But of course, for children, your bodies are and brains are still developing. Oftentimes, trying these non-medical interventions first may do the trick. And if they still don't work, then you might want to seek the help of another professional. So to learn more about me and what I do and how I might be able to help your child succeed, especially if their anxiety, if you're dealing with the anxiety piece, sort of doing everything that I mentioned, and you need help with how it interfaces with their schoolwork or their testing, for example, go to crimsoncoaching.com/contact to sign up for a complimentary consultation to learn about ways that I help students with this, as well as with testing in general and college essays and tutoring. Parents can subscribe to my monthly newsletter at crimsoncoaching.com/newsletter to get news about my upcoming talks on college planning and adolescent education. I'm taking a break during June. June is a really busy month for most families, so I don't schedule any talks during June, but I will be giving talks all throughout the summer and fall. And if you would like a little handout on my top tips to tame anxiety, feel free to email me at info@crimsoncoaching.com. So before we go, I would just like to thank you for watching if you've gotten to this point in the program, and thank once again Ossining Public Library and Louis Crisci for inviting me to speak to you tonight. And please, if you do have any questions, I don't know the answer to everything, but if I don't, I will try to find out the answer for you. Feel free to email me at info@crimsoncoaching.com. And my website really does have a lot of free resources on it rather. So do feel free to search around crimsoncoaching.com and take advantage of all those resources. So here's wishing you a relatively anxiety-free end of finals period and Regents period, and a wonderful summer. Thanks so much. Bye.